She stood at the edge of everything she had built, watching it crumble under the weight of other people's expectations. They wanted her small and quiet and grateful, for scraps of acknowledgement thrown like bones to a dog. Every room she entered demanded she prove her right to exist in it, and every success required twice the effort for half the recognition. But something shifted inside her that morning. She realized she had been begging and pleading and performing for an audience that would never applaud. No more. Morning sun barely broke through the gray clouds as she sat in her car outside the building that had consumed 5 years of her life. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, and her reflection stared back at her from the rearview mirror, showing eyes that had grown tired from constant battles disguised as professional development. Sarah had always believed that hard work spoke for itself, but she learned the painful truth that in rooms filled with egos, her work was only as loud as the men who claimed it. She thought about the presentation she delivered yesterday. 3 weeks of research and analysis and strategic planning poured into 40 slides that represented solutions to problems the company had struggled with for 2 years. She had run the numbers 5 times and consulted with every department and built contingency plans for scenarios they hadn't even considered yet. When she walked into that boardroom, she carried not just a presentation but a roadmap to increase revenue by 30% within 18 months. But the moment she opened her mouth to speak, she felt the familiar resistance. David interrupted her introduction to ask if she had coordinated with the finance team, as if she would present budget projections without financial consultation. Mark questioned her data sources as if she had invented statistics in her basement. Tom asked if she needed help explaining the technical aspects, as if her engineering degree was decorative. Each interruption was a small cut, and death by 1,000 cuts was still death. She powered through because that's what she had trained herself to do. Smile and stay calm, and never show frustration because frustrated women are emotional, and emotional women are not leadership material. She answered every question with patience she did not feel, and provided evidence for claims that should have been self-evident, and watched their faces remain skeptical, no matter how thoroughly she dismantled their doubts. When she finished, her boss thanked her for her effort. Effort, not her expertise or innovation or strategic thinking, just effort as if she were a student who tried really hard on a school project. Then he turned to Richard and asked what he thought, and Richard, who had contributed nothing but had attended all the meetings she led, leaned back and said it was interesting, but maybe needed more development. The room nodded, and within minutes her presentation became a task force led by Richard to further explore Sarah's initial ideas. She sat there watching her work be reassigned to someone else and felt something inside her break. Not break from weakness, but break free from the chains of seeking approval from people who were determined to withhold it. She had spent 5 years begging for respect through her actions and achievements and dedication, but begging never worked because the system was designed to keep her kneeling. That night, she went home and sat in silence. No television or music or distractions. Just silence and the company of her own thoughts. She thought about every time she had diminished herself to make others comfortable, every time she had apologized for being right, every time she had softened her language to avoid being called aggressive, every time she had celebrated crumbs while watching men feast on opportunities she had prepared. She remembered her first year at the company when she suggested a new client management system and was told it was too ambitious. 6 months later, David suggested the same system and was praised for his forward thinking and given a bonus for innovation. She remembered when she asked for a promotion after exceeding every target and was told she needed more experience, and then watched Richard get promoted after 1 successful quarter. She remembered every meeting where she was interrupted, and every idea that was stolen, and every achievement that was attributed to her team rather than her leadership. The pattern was clear, and it was suffocating. She had been playing a game where the rules changed based on who was playing. Men were confident, and she was arrogant. Men were ambitious, and she was aggressive. Men were detail-oriented, and she was nitpicky. The same behaviors produced opposite evaluations, and she had exhausted herself trying to find the perfect balance that would finally earn her the respect she deserved. But that night in the silence, she realized she was asking the wrong question. She had been asking how she could make them respect her, when the real question was why she needed their respect at all. Why had she given them the power to determine her worth? Why had she accepted their framework that demanded she prove herself endlessly, while others were granted automatic credibility? She thought about her daughter, who was 8 years old, and watched everything Sarah did. What was she teaching her? That women must work 3 times as hard for a fraction of the recognition? That self-worth comes from external validation? That begging for respect is part of being professional? The thought made her sick. She wanted her daughter to see a woman who knew her value and refused to negotiate it with people who were invested in diminishing it. The next morning, she walked into the office with a different energy. Not anger, but clarity. She had always dressed professionally, but today she dressed powerfully. Not to impress them, but to remind herself that she was not there to blend in or apologize for existing. She was there because she was exceptional, and if they couldn't see that, then the problem was their vision, not her visibility. The morning meeting started, and her boss began discussing the task force that would explore her presentation. Richard was already talking about timelines and resource allocation as if the ideas had originated in his mind. Sarah listened for exactly 90 seconds before she spoke, and when she spoke, she did not raise her hand or wait for permission or apologize for interrupting. She said that she appreciated the enthusiasm for the project, but wanted to clarify that this was not exploratory work. This was a complete strategic plan that she had already vetted and validated and prepared for immediate implementation. She said that forming a task force to redevelop existing solutions was inefficient, and if the company was serious about growth, they needed to execute, not deliberate. The room went silent, and her boss looked uncomfortable, and Richard looked annoyed, and she felt absolutely nothing but conviction. Her boss started to speak about the importance of collaborative development, and she cut him off. Not rudely, but firmly. She said that she had collaborated with every relevant department, and that further delay was not collaboration, it was avoidance. She could see the shock on their faces. This was not the Sarah they knew who smiled through disrespect and accepted dismissal gracefully. This Sarah had boundaries, and she was enforcing them without apology. Her boss suggested they table the discussion, and she said no. She said they could either commit to implementing her plan with her as the lead, or she would take her expertise elsewhere, because she was done watching other people get promoted off her ideas. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable, and she let it sit there. She was not going to rescue them from the awkwardness of her self-advocacy. For 5 years, she had made everything comfortable for everyone else, and that ended now. Her boss stammered something about discussing it with upper management, and she said she would need an answer by end of day, and then she stood up and walked out of the meeting. Her hands shook as she walked back to her office, but not from fear, from liberation. She had spent so long being afraid of their disapproval that she had forgotten what it felt like to approve of herself. She had been so worried about burning bridges that she had set herself on fire to keep them warm. But bridges that require you to diminish yourself are not worth preserving. The hours passed, and she worked on her resume and updated her portfolio and reached out to professional contacts. She was not bluffing about taking her expertise elsewhere. She had stayed in this company hoping things would change, but hope was not a strategy, and she was done hoping for people to recognize what they were determined to overlook. At 4 p.m, her boss called her into his office. He looked uncomfortable, and she felt calm. He said that her approach in the meeting was inappropriate and that she needed to be a team player. She smiled and said that she had been a team player for 5 years and the team had played her. He bristled at that and said that she was being emotional, and she laughed. Actually laughed. She said that clarity was not emotion, and that standing up for herself was not hysteria, and that if he was uncomfortable with her advocating for her own value, then he should examine why female self-advocacy threatened him. He said that she was out of line, and she said that she had been out of line for years by accepting less than she deserved. She told him that she would not be participating in any task force to redevelop her own work, and that she expected either to lead the implementation of her plan or to be released from her contract with full severance. He said that was not how things worked, and she said that was exactly how things worked when you stopped begging and started negotiating from a position of knowing your worth. He told her to take the rest of the day to cool off, and she told him she was perfectly cool, but that he had until end of business to make a decision. She walked out of his office and felt taller than she had in years. She was not being difficult or unreasonable, or any of the words they use to describe women who refuse to shrink. She was being clear about her boundaries and her value, and if that made them uncomfortable, then their comfort was not her responsibility. By 5 o'clock, she had an email from Human Resources requesting a meeting the next morning. She knew what that meant. They were going to try to intimidate her into backing down, or they were going to let her go. Either way, she was ready. She had already sent her resume to 3 companies and had already gotten responses from 2 expressing interest. Her expertise was valuable, and if this company could not see that, then others would. That night, she sat with her daughter at dinner, and her daughter asked if she had a good day at work. Sarah thought about it and said that she had a powerful day. Her daughter asked what that meant, and Sarah said it meant that she had stopped asking permission to be treated with respect and had started demanding it. Her daughter looked confused, and Sarah explained that sometimes people will try to make you feel like you have to earn basic respect, but that respect is not something you earn. It is something you give yourself and refuse to negotiate. Her daughter asked if people were mean to her, and Sarah said that people were not mean. They were just used to her being small, and when you stop being small, it confuses people who benefited from your smallness. She told her daughter that being brave does not mean you are never scared. It means you are scared and you do it anyway, because you know your worth is not up for debate. The next morning, she walked into the Human Resources meeting with her head high and her shoulders back. The HR director and her boss were both there looking serious. They said that they valued her contributions, but that her recent behavior was concerning and did not align with company culture. She said that if company culture meant accepting less than she deserved, then she was happy to not align with it. They offered her a small raise and a vague promise of future advancement if she agreed to work collaboratively on the project. She said no. She said that she would accept nothing less than full leadership of the implementation with appropriate title change and compensation, or she would resign effective immediately with severance. They said that was not possible, and she said, "Then we are done here." She stood up and walked out and submitted her resignation within the hour. No 2 weeks' notice, because she owed them nothing. She had given them 5 years of excellence, and they had given her excuses. She was done begging for respect from people who were determined to withhold it. Within 3 days, she had 2 job offers, both with higher salaries and leadership positions. Within 2 weeks, she started at a company that did not require her to prove her worth, because they had hired her specifically for her expertise. Within a month, she heard that her old company had tried to implement her strategic plan without her, and it had failed because Richard did not understand the intricacies of the system she had designed. They reached out asking if she would consult, and she declined, not out of spite, but because she was busy building something new in a place that valued her from the beginning. She had spent too long begging for respect in rooms that were designed to keep her powerless. Now she was in rooms where her voice mattered, and her ideas were implemented, and her leadership was celebrated. She learned that the opposite of begging for respect was not demanding it. The opposite of begging was knowing your worth so deeply that other people's inability to see it became their problem, not yours. Knowing that you do not need permission to take up space or speak up or walk away from situations that diminish you. Knowing that respect is not given or earned but claimed by people who refuse to accept anything less. She was a woman who refused to beg for respect, and in that refusal she found her power. Not power over others, but power over her own life and choices and future. She stopped performing for approval and started living for authenticity. She stopped shrinking to fit into their boxes and started building her own spaces. She stopped asking if she was good enough and started knowing that she was. And every day her daughter watched and learned that women do not have to beg or plead or perform for basic human dignity. That strength is not loud or aggressive, but quiet and certain. That walking away from what diminishes you is not failure, but freedom. That respect begins with the woman in the mirror who decides she is done apologizing for being powerful. This was not a story about anger or revenge. This was a story about a woman who woke up one day and realized that the only approval she needed was her own, that the only validation that mattered was internal, that begging for respect from people invested in your smallness was a game she would never win, so she stopped playing. She changed the game entirely by refusing to participate in systems designed to break her. She became the woman she needed when she was younger, the woman who showed her daughter that your value is not negotiable, the woman who proved that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do, the woman who refused to beg and in that refusal found everything she had been searching for, not in their approval, but in her own unshakable knowing that she was enough exactly as she was, and anyone who could not see that was simply not her people. And she never looked back because forward was where her power lived.